I know every operating
At my
system like
last
the
job,
back of
in
my
my current
hand.
role,
When
I
it comes to
25 years of
IT.
experience and have worked with several people from your company. I've been recognized for my passion. My team is everything.
LinkedIn delivers candidates who rise above the rest. With an up-to-date view into shared connections, skills, and interests you won't find anywhere else. See why 86% of small businesses who post a job on LinkedIn get a qualified candidate within a day. Post a job for free at linkedin.com/achieve. LinkedIn, your next great hire is here.
Hello, welcome to Strong Sense of Place.
In each episode, we focus on one destination and discuss what makes it different than any other place on Earth.
Then we recommend 5 books we love that took us there on the page.
I'm Melissa Jolan.
I'm David Humphreys.
We're going around the world, one great read at a time.
Thanks for joining us. Welcome to Strong Sense of Place. Today we get curious about detective agencies. If you're listening to this on launch day, Bloody Scotland starts up today. That's an international crime writing festival in a charming town called Stirling in Scotland. They have a really fun lineup of authors this year. Richard Armitage, he's an actor who was in Berlin Station. He'll be talking about his new book. Anne Cleves created the series Shetland. She'll be there. Peter May, who wrote The Black House, which we talked about in our Scotland episode, also there.
How am I not going to this festival this weekend?
Yeah, exactly that. The thing, though, that makes me really want to attend Bloody Scotland is this. They have a tradition. And the tradition is that on the first night of the festival, they gather by a local church, several hundred people, and they hand out torches and they march through the streets to the venue.
Okay, I'm saying it right here on the show. Let's all go to that together next year.
Nothing brings people together quicker than skulking through a quaint Scottish village, torches high, crime on their minds.
Right?
Yeah.
Sign me up immediately.
Yeah. Today on Two Truths and a Lie, we're going to talk about the remarkable life of a man who founded the first private detective agency. He packed about 3 lives' worth of adventure into his one. And then we'll talk about 5 books we love.
I'm recommending a book that is a really delightful mashup of noir detective and whimsical fantasy.
Oh, that's awesome. I've got a book that will get you started on your way to becoming a private investigator.
I am ready.
But first, Mel's going to bring us up to speed with the Detective Agency 101.
We started the case where we always start, at the beginning, with the basics, with the 101.
One of my favorite things about doing these theme shows as opposed to the geographical destinations is that we get to have a super nerdy conversation about how we're defining it. I love talking about taxonomy.
Yeah.
Like, does a book about carnivals work for the circus show?
Right.
Are archives included in the episode about libraries? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
For this episode, we had to categorize all the different kinds of detectives to determine which ones meet our criteria. For example, there are amateur sleuths with no official credentials whatsoever. They're just kind of nosy.
Like Agatha Christie's Miss Marple, or Nancy Drew.
Or the charming group of neighbors in the Thursday Murder Club.
Yeah. Or Vera Wang and Vera Wang's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. My old-time friend, Encyclopedia Brown.
There are also police detectives with entire departments behind them.
Sure. Harry Bosch from Michael Connolly. Inspector Gamache from Louise Penny. They rhyme. Bosch and Gamache.
There are insurance investigators and journalists who are poking around in fraud and corruption.
Like the cast of the movie Spotlight.
Oh, I love Spotlight. That's such a good movie.
So good. Although that's nonfiction, which is different than everything else we've mentioned so far.
I also really like the Tuva Moodysson books by Will Dean. They're about a journalist in rural Sweden. I talked about a couple of those previously. There are bounty hunters who are just trying to earn $1.
Yeah. Like the main character in the One for the Money, Two for the Dough books.
Stefanie Plum.
Yes.
By Janet Ivanovich.
Yes.
So I thought there were about 20 of those,
Yeah.
and I looked it up.
Yeah.
31.
Wow.
There are 31 Stefanie Plum books.
Wow, Stefanie Plum.
I mean, good for them.
Yeah. Other bounty hunters include almost the entire cast of Cowboy Bebop, which is bounty hunters in space. Really fun.
Then there are medical examiners who take their curiosity outside of their labs.
Yeah. Quincy.
Quincy, that is a callback TV show.
Yeah.
On the book side of the world, there's Kay Scarpetta
Yeah.
in the series by Patricia Cornwell. I was really into those books in the 90s. And all of those are so good. And we're not talking about any of them today.
Not one of them.
We'll put links to show notes and all of those, but we're not going to discuss them.
And we still have a remarkably full episode.
We really do, because today the show is all about PIs.
Yeah.
Private investigators. The gumshoes who work outside the pesky laws of search warrants and bureaucracy. Maybe they have an office with a frosted glass door and a dame with great gams pecking away at a typewriter.
Sure.
Maybe the detective is the gal with moxie, out there hunting down the bad guys. The common thread is that they're independent and they are very bad at risk management. Today, I thought to honor private detectives, I would tell one amazing story about America's first lady detective.
Oh, all right.
But to do that, we have to talk about the Pinkerton National Detective Agency first.
Okay.
Pinkerton was the first detective agency in the United States.
We're going to talk about the first detective agency in the world in a couple minutes.
Right. Pinkerton was founded around 1850 in Chicago by a man named Alan Pinkerton. Apparently, he was a rabble-rouser from Glasgow, Scotland, and he was forced to emigrate to America in 1842 because of his, quote, radical politics.
Huh.
Mm-hmm. He and his wife settled in Chicago, where he worked as a barrel maker. According to PBS, he accidentally discovered the lair of a counterfeiting gang and had them arrested.
Wow.
And because it was the late 19th century, that instantly made him a celebrity, which he parlayed into other crime-solving jobs.
In my head, the story became that he was annoyed by whoever these counterfeiters were, not that he discovered them, and that he sent them up for the cops, and now he's a hero, and now he's like, how can I parlay this?
When he opened the Pinkerton Agency, he gave it the motto, "We never sleep," and a logo with an unblinking eye. And that's what led to independent detectives being called private eyes.
That's awesome.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. You know how a classic noir detective story often starts when a beautiful woman walks into the detective's office with a lot of attitude and a mysterious background?
Sure.
What if I told you that kind of happened in real life? Imagine the United States in 1856. Men wore frock coats and top hats. Women wore bell skirts that reached to the floor. There were only 31 states, and Franklin Pierce was the president. The agriculture in the South was still built around enslaved labor, although the abolitionist movement was gaining traction. And the North boomed with factories, railroads, and urbanization. The California Gold Rush had just ended the previous year, and the country was 5 years away from the election of Abraham Lincoln and the start of the U.S. Civil War. On a hot August day, a young girl named Kate Warren marched herself into Alan Pinkerton's office and requested a job. She was 23 years old with long brown hair, pulled back in a smooth bun, a somber long dress, and an open, curious face. In my imagination, she looks a lot like Jane Eyre.
Played in the movie by Ruth Wilson?
Sure. I would love that. Pinkerton, busy man,
Yep.
barely paused before explaining to her that he didn't need another secretary. And Warren replied, in what Pinkerton later described as a very pleasant tone, that she was not there to be a secretary. She was there to be a detective. At this point in American history, the private detective had only been a thing for about 6 years, and there had never been an American lady detective. To his credit, Pinkerton asked Kate Warren why she thought she could be a private eye, and this is what she said. Women have an eye for detail and are excellent observers. She went on to explain that no one would expect a woman to be an undercover detective, that she could befriend the wives of suspected criminals to ferret out information. What she didn't tell Pinkerton was back at home in Erin, New York, she'd had dreams of becoming an actress. And the role of detective would let her use her honest face and acting skills for a good cause. Pinkerton wrote this in his memoir. I finally became convinced that it would be a good idea to employ her. True, it was the first experiment of the sort that had ever been tried. But we live in a progressive age and in a progressive country. I therefore determined at least to try it.
Good on you, Pinkerton.
Also, he was an abolitionist, so heads up.
Yeah.
Nice. One of Kate Warren's first successes was an embezzlement case. One Mr. Maroney, an employee of the Adams Express Company, had stolen $50,000 of company funds. For context, that's about $1.8 million today.
That's a big haul.
Yes. Warren set out for Montgomery, Alabama, and swapped her Yankee accent for the persona of a Southern belle. She became fast friends with Mrs. Maroney and joined her at social events while she secretly gathered evidence. Warren eventually finagled a full confession out of Mr. Maroney and found the buried cash. He was convicted and sentenced to 10 years in an Alabama lockup.
Wow. That's awesome.
Pinkerton said that Warren had succeeded far beyond his utmost expectations, and he put her in charge of a new female detective bureau. But her biggest case was still to come. Protecting President Lincoln from an assassination attempt.
What?
Yes. To celebrate his inauguration in 1861, Abraham Lincoln had planned an 11-day whistle-stop tour from Springfield, Illinois to Washington, D.C., and his route included a stop in Baltimore. Clues pointed to an attempt on his life being planned in Baltimore. So Pinkerton sent his best agent, Kate Warren, to foil the plot. Again, she adopted a Southern accent, and she went undercover as either Mrs. Cherry or Mrs. Barley. She wore a black and white ribbon pin on her dress, which was a sign of her allegiance to the South's cause, and mingled with secessionists at their headquarters, the swanky Barnum City Hotel. While she was undercover, Kate learned of multiple plots to kill the president-elect.
Oh, geez.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
The most likely one was an attack while Lincoln transferred from his Pennsylvania train to the one that would take him to Washington. So when he got to Baltimore, he had to get off of one train, get in a carriage, go to a different station, and get on a different train. Pinkerton apparently pleaded with Lincoln to cancel all of these stops because he was so exposed, but Lincoln refused.
Sure. Politician, sure.
And at one point, Lincoln's bodyguard wanted to arm him with a revolver and a Bowie knife. Pinkerton had to talk them out of it. Instead, he and Kate Warren put together a pretty audacious plan that would sound like a farce if it wasn't so dangerous.
What happened?
She posed as Mrs. Barley. She went to the station and she bought 4 tickets for a sleeping car from Philadelphia to Washington, connecting through Baltimore. She was very demure. She looked very respectable. She was going to be traveling with her invalid brother, who was actually Abraham Lincoln, disguised in a soft hat pulled down over his brow, an old overcoat, and maybe a shawl over his shoulders. Accounts vary on whether or not the shawl was actually part of the disguise.
Yeah.
They made a fake family of 4: Kate Warren, Alan Pinkerton, Lincoln, and his weapons-crazy bodyguard. And they snuck him onto the train in Baltimore in the middle of the night. It was a first-come, first-served train car. So Mrs. Barley tipped the conductor a $50 to hold a car for them so they could be guaranteed they would all sit together. They got on the train in the middle of the night, and by 6 o'clock the next morning, they all arrived safely in Washington, D.C. A week later, Lincoln became the 16th president of the United States.
That's amazing.
Pinkerton and Warren continued to do their work during the Civil War. They posed as a married couple and infiltrated genteel Southern society to gather Confederate secrets for the Union. After the war, Warren went undercover at different times, posing as a fortune teller and she befriended a murder suspect's wife. Sadly, in January 1868, she died of pneumonia.
How old was she, do you know?
She was only 35. I know. She could have gone on so many more undercover cases.
Yeah.
Who would suspect a little old lady of being a detective? According to reports, Alan Pinkerton was at her bedside when she died, and he arranged for her to be buried in his family's cemetery plot in Chicago. In his memoir, The Murderer and the Fortune Teller, Pinkerton wrote, "It has been claimed that detective work is unwomanly, that is only performed by abandoned women, and that no respectable woman who becomes a detective can remain virtuous. To these theories, I enter a positive denial. I have no hesitation in saying that the profession of a detective, for a lady possessing the requisite characteristics, is as useful and honorable employment as can be found in any walk of life." If you want to know more about the great Kate Warren, I can recommend 2 books. For nonfiction, The Pinks, the first women detectives, operatives, and spies with the Pinkerton National Detective Agency by Chris Entz. It's very well reviewed. I've read only the introduction and the first chapter so far, but I thought it was really good, and I would love to read more of it. For fiction, a few years ago, I read the novel Girl in Disguise by Greer McAllister. I really enjoyed the bits about Kate Warren's detective work. There's a romance subplot that I was less enamored of.
Okay.
But the author does a really nice job of fleshing out the known facts with some flights of imagination where there are holes in the history.
Yeah.
She's very respectful of Kate Warren. If you want to know more about her in the guise of fiction, it's a pretty fun read. That is the story of America's first lady PI, Kate Warren, and the Detective Agency 101.
That's awesome.
This is 2 truths and a lie.
Are you ready for 2 truths and a lie?
I will do my best.
I'm about to say 3 statements. 2 of them are true. Mel doesn't know which one is the lie. Statement number 1. The man credited with starting the modern detective agency was a cardinal who worked with the Pope in the 1800s. Statement number 2, a French detective once solved a murder that he himself had committed. And 3, so as you're probably aware, Murder in the Rue Morgue is a short story by Edgar Allan Poe, and it's considered one of the earliest examples of detective fiction. Here's the statement. Poe scholars don't like to talk about the culprit in Murder in the Rue Morgue. So from the top. Statement 1, the man credited with starting the modern detective agency was a cardinal who worked with the Pope in the 1800s.
True.
Really?
I don't know.
Okay. So I suspect that men in power have always had agents that have some things in common with a modern detective, right? They are getting out and working with the people and collecting intelligence and sort of serving authority. But the man credited with starting the modern detective agency was not a pious man.
Oh.
Eugene Francois Vidocq was French. Maybe you got that from the name. He led a very full life. He was born in 1775, and he started as a criminal.
Wow.
Yeah, there's a story that when he was about 14, he and his buddy convinced his parents to leave the house they were in. They were bakers. The parents were bakers. So the kid said, there's a problem at the bakery. There's a fire. You got to get out of here. And with the parents away, they took the family's money.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Rotten little brat.
Yep. And then those 2 brats headed to a den of iniquity where they spent the next 3 days.
Stop it.
Only to leave penniless and without their clothes. As a young man, Vidocq joined the circus, and he worked his way up from stable boy to performer. He had an act where he played a Caribbean cannibal. He'd wear makeup and eat raw meat on stage.
Totally inappropriate.
Yep. For a while, he was a soldier, so he was an expert fencer, and he did well enough in the military that he was promoted. But at his promotion ceremony, he challenged an officer to a duel.
This guy is such a loose cannon.
Yeah. The officer refused to engage him, so Vidocq struck him, which at the time could get you the death penalty.
Sure.
So instead, he deserted and then re-enlisted in a different unit under a false name. By the time he was 34, Vidocq had been in and out of prison several times, sometimes for fraud, frequently because he was sleeping with a woman and the husband would find out and shenanigans would ensue. And then he would get out. Vidocq would get out. He'd escape. He escaped jail once by dressing as a prison guard and another time as a nun. He once left a courthouse by jumping out a window and into a river.
Where are the books and movies about this man?
Yeah. He tried to go straight once, but that only led to his ex-wife blackmailing him. I'll tell them who you really are unless you hand over some money, that kind of thing. And his fellow former convicts forced him to fence some items for him. By 1809, he was 34 and in jail again. He's facing a death sentence this time because of all of the other times.
Sure.
And he comes up with an idea. He decides what he's going to do is turn informant for the police. Mm-hmm. He'll dig up information in the jail and he'll tell the cops, and he stays alive and they arrest some people and everybody wins. And the police go for it. And it works. He stays in jail for the next 2 years.
Wow.
And helps the police. The law is happy with them. They're so happy that they release Vidocq. But so that they don't raise suspicions, when he's released, they make it look like he escaped. As a newly released man, he continues in his line as a secret agent for the Paris police. So he gets information and he turns it over. He even took part in crimes to suddenly turn on his partners.
No moral compass whatsoever.
Vidocq may have invented entrapment. This is all successful enough that Vidocq realizes he has more business than he can manage. So he organizes a plainclothes unit. A year later, Emperor Napoleon I made the unit a state security police force. They called themselves the Sûreté Nationale, and they go on to become today's French National Police. Is his biography over? It is not. Vidocq would hire a few dozen agents for this force, most of whom were ex-criminals. Eventually, some politics got bad for Vidocq, right?
Shocking.
Yep. And after 20 years of leading the Sûreté, he resigns. And it is here now, finally, that Vidocq goes into business for himself. At 58, he establishes the Office of Information, the first known detective agency. And again, he hires his old ex-convict buddies to help him. Trouble follows Vidocq for the rest of his life. He is in and out of jail. He continues to have affairs. He continues to anger people in power. He survives cholera. And he finally dies in 1857 at the age of 81.
Wow.
When he died, 11 women came forth saying they had claim to his estate. Yeah.
Oh.
So the little chaos gremlin left a long shadow. He's credited with introducing undercover work, ballistics, and criminology. He made the first plaster cast impressions of shoe prints.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. He's also credited as a philanthropist of sorts. He claimed he never informed on anyone who stole from genuine need.
Oh,
yeah.
That melted my heart a little bit.
A little bit.
Also, we need to give him credit for, I think, setting the stereotype of the damaged, roguish, but somehow still charming detective.
Yes, absolutely. There is currently a Vidocq Society in Philadelphia. They are a group of professionals from the law enforcement world, forensic experts, FBI profilers, homicide investigators, all of that. They meet and they try to solve cold cases from around the world. The membership rolls are closed, and the number of members never exceeds the number of years in Vidocq's life.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Vidocq inspired a number of writers. Both of the main characters in Les Miserables are modeled after Vidocq. Jean Valjean is the younger version. Police Inspector Javert is the older one. Vidocq's name appears in Moby Dick and Great Expectations.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's said to be the inspiration for both Poe and Arthur Conan Doyle.
Huh.
More recently, Vidocq appeared in our friend Richard Cadry's series, Sandman Slim. He is alive, immortal, and living in modern-day Los Angeles.
What a life.
Yeah. Statement 2. Okay, so that was false. So we know these next two are true.
Mm-hmm.
Statement 2. A French detective once solved a murder that he himself had committed.
That's true. Amazing.
So I had trouble verifying this. I found an article printed with the details by the Washington Post in 1983, but nothing since, which feels weird. Still, the Washington Post has fact checkers.
I mean, they're pretty legit.
Yeah, right? So what I'm saying is we might have 2 lies in the episode about detectives. I don't know. Somehow that feels appropriate. The story is about a detective in Paris in the late 1800s, Robert Ledru. He has made a reputation for himself by catching a few murderers and breaking up a circle of anarchists. And in 1885, he gets a call from the police in Le Havre. Several sailors have gone missing, so he takes the train and he arrives late and he checks into a hotel. And the next day, he goes to the police station to start working on the sailor case. But the locals are distracted now. They're excited because they've found a murder victim. The victim is a dress shop owner who's been shot on the beach. His name is André Monet. So Ledru and the local police go to the beach and they examine the corpse. They find footprints in the sand. They find a bullet. Ledru looks at the footprints. He looks at the bullet. He pulls out his own revolver and he checks it. And in my imagination, Ledru says, "Gentlemen, you need look no further for your killer. He is right here. I am the man who killed André Monet." And he points out that the footprints match his own. They're the same size and the same missing toe. He shows the police that his revolver is missing a bullet and that it's a match for the firearm used in the murder. And he confesses that when he woke up that morning, his socks were wet.
What?
Yeah. But he has no memory of the shooting. And apparently, he was sleepwalking when he shot Monet.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. As the story goes.
Oh, that is so tragic.
Yeah. As the story goes, Ledru was stressed from his work in Paris. He served time for the murder, and then he retired to the countryside. I read that story, and 2 things sort of popped out at me. One is that it feels like the shortest possible noir story.
Mm-hmm. Microfiction.
Yeah. 2, it seems very clean, like an Encyclopedia Brown mystery for adults,
Yeah.
right? But in cases as recent as 2008, individuals who committed murder while sleepwalking have been acquitted. So, maybe? Statement 3. Poe scholars don't like to talk about the culprit in Murder in the Rue Morgue.
This is where I have to confess that even though I love Edgar Allan Poe, I have not read that story.
Yeah. I'm going to spoil it too.
Okay.
But in a minute. So I'm about to read you a story. I found this story online. I have no idea when it was written or why or where it's from, but it's such a great story. I'm just going to deliver the whole thing in almost its original form. I have softened some curses.
Okay.
Here's the story. My American Lit professor went to this Poe conference. Like, to be clear, this is a man who has a doctorate in being a book nerd. He reads Moby Dick to his 4-year-old son. And Poe is one of the cornerstones of American literature, right? So this should be right up his alley. No. Apparently, Poe scholars are like advanced. There is a branch of Edgar Allan Poe scholarship that specifically looks for coded messages based on the number of words per line and letters per word Poe uses.
Come on.
My professor, who has a PhD in American literature, realizes he is totally out of his depth. But he already committed his day to this, so he thinks, screw it. And he goes to a panel on racism in Poe's works because that's relevant to his interests. Some background info. Edgar Allan Poe was a broke white alcoholic from Virginia who wrote horror in the first half of the 19th century. Rule number 1 of horror academia is that horror reflects the cultural anxieties of its time. See also my other professor's sermon about how zombie stories are popular when people are scared of immigrants, or that the Purge movie was literally about the election. Since Poe's work is a product of 1800s white Southern culture, you can safely assume it's at least a little bit about race. But the racial subtext is very open to interpretation, and scholars believe all kinds of different things about what Poe says about race, if he says anything, and the Poe stands get extremely tense about it. So, my professor sits down to watch this panel, and within like 5 minutes, a bunch of crusty academics get super heated about Poe's theoretical racism. Because it's academia, though, this is limited to poorly concealed passive aggression and forceful tones of inside voice.
Forceful tones of inside voice. So good.
One professor is like, this isn't even about race. And another professor is like, this proves she's a racist. People are interrupting each other. Tensions are rising. A panelist starts saying that Poe is like writing a critique of how racist society was, and the racist stuff is there to prove that racism is stupid, and that on a metaphorical level, the racist philosophy always loses. And then my professor, perhaps in a bid to prove that he too is a smart literature person, loudly calls, "But what about the orangutan?" Some more background. In Poe's well-known short story, The Murder in the Rue Morgue, two single ladies, a lovely old woman and her lovely daughter, who takes care of her, aka super vulnerable and respectable people, are violently killed. The murderer turns out to be not a person, but an orangutan, brought back by a sailor who went to like Burma or something. And it's pretty freaking racially coded. Like, they really focus on all this stuff about coarse hairs and big hands and superhuman strength and chattering that sounds like people talking but isn't actually. If that's intentional, then he's literally written an analogy about how black people are a threat to vulnerable white women, which is classic white supremacist. But if he really only meant for it to be an orangutan, then it's a whole other metaphor about how colonialism pillages other countries and brings their wealth back to Europe, and that's really going to bite them in the ass one day. Klansman or comrade, it all hangs on this. Much later, when my professor told the story to a Poe nerd friend, the guy said the orangutan thing was one of the biggest landmines in their field. He said it was a reliable discussion ruiner that started so many shouting matches that some conferences had an actual ban on bringing it up.
Wow.
So the place goes dead silent as every giant-ass Poe stand in the room is immediately thrust into a series of war flashbacks. The orangutan argument, violently carried out over seminar tables and literary journals, at graduate house parties, the spittle flying, the wine and coffee spilled, the friendships torn, the red faces and bulging veins, curses thrown and teaching posts abandoned, panels just like this one fallen into chaos. Distant sirens, skies falling, the dog-eared Norton Critical Edition slicing through the air like sabers, the textual support. Oh, the quotes. And they gaze at this madman in numb disbelief. But he could not have known. Nay, he was a literary theorist, a 17th century man, only a visitor to their haunted land. He had never heard the whistle of the mortars overhead. He had never felt the cold earth under his cheek as he prayed for God's deliverance. And yet, he would have broken their fragile peace and brought them all back into the trenches. My professor sits there for a second, still totally clueless. And the panel moderator suddenly stands up in his tweed jacket and yells with the raw panic of a once broken man, "We do not talk about the orangutan."
That is an amazing piece of writing.
It's informative and entertaining.
Yes.
Yeah. That's it. That's two truths and a lie.
Last week was our first playoff game, and my plaque psoriasis was so itchy under all my gear. Sometimes just thinking about scratching could take me out of the moment. And then my doctor told me I could get clearer skin with a pill called Otezla.
Otezla apremilast is a prescription medicine used to treat adult patients with plaque psoriasis for whom phototherapy or systemic therapy is appropriate. Otezla can help you get clearer skin after just 4 months.
Okay, ready for the next game. Talking to my doctor about a pill was a total game changer.
Don't use Otezla if you're allergic to it. Get medical help right away if you have trouble breathing or swallowing, swelling of the face, lips, tongue, throat, or arms. Severe diarrhea, nausea or vomiting, depression, suicidal thoughts, or weight loss can happen. Tell your doctor if any of these occur and if you have a history of depression or suicidal thoughts. Live in the moment. Ask your doctor about Otezla. Call 1-8444-OTEZLA or visit Otezla.com for prescribing info about cost, and more.
Here are 5 books we love.
Book 1.
My first recommendation is The Verifiers by Jane Peck. This book seamlessly blends a snappy detective caper with a family story, specifically what it's like to be a second-generation American daughter in a Chinese family. The story is set in New York City at an unusual detective agency called Veracity. Veracity is an online dating detective agency. They work for clients on a referral basis to snoop around and see if a romantic partner's online profile is legit or filled with lies.
The nonfiction book that I read on being a detective pointed out that there's a lot of money to be made in that exact field.
Right? Is a potential suitor telling the truth about their job?
Yep.
Are they really single? How many online dating profiles do they have? How many potential partners are they stringing along at once?
What about running a credit check? Yeah.
Our heroine and narrator is Claudia Lynn, and she's kind of living the dream scenario. She wrote her senior thesis on Jane Austen, and she's a lifelong fan of mystery novels. And now she's working at a romance detective agency. At one point, she shouts out Jane Austen like this: "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single person in possession of a superlative dating profile must not be lying about anything." Claudia is inquisitive and quite clever. She lives in Queens and rides her bike all over New York City. She's gay, a secret she's keeping from her mom, who desperately wants her to settle down and marry a nice Chinese boy. And even though she works at an agency that's all about the digital world, she is not super online. She's just a curious girl who likes books and other girls.
Okay.
Claudia's first big case is a mysterious client who's investigating 2 possible suitors. One who's completely ghosted her, and one who might be lying to her. Just as Claudia is digging into the investigation, the client goes missing. In the real world and online, like poof, all of her profiles are gone. Claudia is kind of delighted to find herself in the middle of a mystery like the one she loves to read. So when her bosses tell her to back off because their client has evaporated and they're not going to get paid,
Right.
she secretly continues the investigation and she gets herself into all kinds of sticky situations on her way to the truth.
That's a great setup.
It really is. This book was just a good time from start to finish. Since I can't say too much more about the mystery without spoiling everything,
Right.
I thought I would share 4 things that I really enjoyed about the reading experience.
Okay.
Number 1, Claudia. It was so much fun to spend time with her. She's irreverent and she's scrappy, but she has tender parts too, especially where her family is concerned. And she gets all caught up in her imagination, which I could really relate to. Claudia also gets caught up in the drama of her circumstances. At one point, she says, "I let myself think that I was the protagonist in some grand adventure, and for that, I forfeited what I did have that was real."
That's sad.
Yeah. It's a very fun mystery, but there's some legitimate emotional beats in the story. Which brings me to the second thing I loved, the immigrant family dynamic. Claudia's mom is a deeply unhappy, bitter woman, and she is not afraid to spread that around.
That's too bad.
Yeah. Claudia's brother is a driven overachiever. Their sister is stunningly beautiful. Claudia is considered to be the favorite, even though her mom also makes her the brunt of the sharpest of her criticisms. And everyone in the family, their gift, the favorite, the overachiever, the beauty, is also their curse. The way the family interacts with each other felt very real to me. Their pursuit of love, the way they know just what to say to wound each other, and then they feel very real regret about doing that as they're doing it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a standard bad family rhythm.
Well, and it's clear that they love each other, but they just cannot find a way to be good to each other. After a typically disastrous family dinner, Claudia says, "It isn't a proper Lynn family gathering until everyone is upset." The third thing I really enjoyed was the inner workings of this very modern detective agency. Instead of making phone calls like old gumshoes, they pour through text chains for clues. Instead of all-night stakeouts, they use an app to track their targets. And the author uses all of this stuff as a jumping-off point to explore how technology changes our interactions with each other and how our online activities create a version of us that may or may not align with real life.
Right.
There's a lot of interesting stuff to be said in there. And finally, this book is filled with literary references and the tropes of Golden Age and noir detective stories. Claudia has a favorite literary detective, and she uses him as a touchstone throughout her investigations. What would Inspector Juan do here? And she name drops classics like Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, Anna Karenina, Othello, in the way only a true bookworm can. It's really fun the way the author ties those things into Claudia's experiences. The heart of this book is a very satisfying mystery. There are plenty of red herrings, peril that seems legit enough to have stakes, and the big reveal at the end happens at a glitzy gala, which, yes, please. But snuck into the fun of all of that, this book explores how we kind of construct personal stories to define who we are to ourselves and to others, and how that also means we can rewrite those stories however and whenever we want.
That sounds really good.
That's The Verifiers by Jane Peck. I should also mention Claudia's adventures continue in a second book called The Rivals that will be published this December. I'll put a link in show notes to that, along with a really nice interview with the author.
This is book 2.
My first book is IQ by Joe Ide. The author, Joe Ide, grew up in South Central Los Angeles, which is a tough neighborhood. This is Compton. This is where Dr. Dre and Ice Cube grew up, and Kendrick Lamar and Tiffany Haddish. It is an infamously challenging neighborhood to become an adult in. And Ide reports that he was part of the only Japanese family in the neighborhood. From a young age, Ide escaped from that world into crime fiction. In particular, he was a fan of Sherlock Holmes.
Aw.
Yeah. In an interview, he said that he had read all 56 stories and 4 novels multiple times before he was in the 8th grade.
That is really sweet.
Yeah. So in my imagination, the author was a skinny little Japanese kid walking around Compton with a dog-eared copy of Hound of the Baskervilles shoved in his pocket. And I think skinny might be the only leap there. And then he grew up, and then he wrote his hero. Isaiah Quintabe is the detective in IQ. He's a brilliant, observant high school dropout. As IQ opens, we find him working as a private detective out of his home in South Central LA. He handles cases that the police don't or won't take, and he frequently barters for his services. So he'll take a sweet potato pie or a radial tire or have someone come and clean his yard while he tracks down deadbeat dads and cold cases. A few stories are talking to each other in IQ. The book goes back and forth between 2005 and 2013. In 2013, we get the story of a case that comes Isaiah's way. A famous rapper's life is being threatened. The attempted murder weapon is a large dog.
Whoa.
Yep. It's a mystery with a pretty standard structure. All of the characters are involved in the rap scene in 2013. The story that I found more compelling, though, is Isaiah's origin story, and that's the story that starts in 2005. There, we hear about Isaiah's older brother, who was killed in a hit and run. Isaiah was with him at the time. He's not sure if it was a murder or not, So he's trying to get to the bottom of that. At the same time, his brother was the only semi-adult in his life. And now he's a young kid trying to figure out how to stay in his apartment and not alert the authorities that he's underage and living on his own. And soon after that, we meet the con, who will be Isaiah's literal partner in crime for a while, and then his Watson.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. His name is Dodson. They have a satisfyingly rocky relationship. And together, and with the voice of his dead brother, Isaiah figures out his own code, right? The thing that drives him to be a detective instead of a criminal. And the book has a lot going for it. Ide's background as a scriptwriter is sort of fully on display here. It's easy to visualize every bit of this book. The story is compelling. The characters are interesting and well drawn. There's a strong sense of LA. But maybe the best thing about it is the dialogue. There are some fantastic lines in this book, and I want to read you a couple of paragraphs. This is from a scene where Isaiah is in a math class in 10th grade. Mrs. Washington is addressing the class. She's described as talking to the class, quote, like someone had tricked her into it.
I love it.
Yeah. All right, she said, inductive reasoning. It's what those so-called detectives on CSI, SVU, LMNOP, and all the rest of them call deductive reasoning, which is wrong, and they should know better. It's inductive reasoning, a tool you will use frequently in geometry, as well as calculus and trigonometry, assuming you get that far. And that certainly won't be you, Jaquan. Stop messing with that girl's hair and pay attention. Your grade on that last test was so low, I had to write it on the bottom of my shoe. Mrs. Washington glared at Jaquan until his face melted. She began again. Inductive reasoning is reasoning to the most likely explanation. It begins with one or more observations, and from those observations, we come to a conclusion that seems to make sense. Okay, an example. Jaquan was walking home from school and somebody hit him on the head with a brick 25 times.
Jeez, Mrs. Washington.
Mrs. Washington and her husband, Wendell, are the suspects. Mrs. Washington is 5'3", 110 pounds, and teaches school. Wendell is 6'2", 250, and works at a warehouse. So who would you say is the more likely culprit? Isaiah and the rest of the class said Wendell. Why? Mrs. Washington said. Because Mrs. Washington may have wanted to hit Jaquan with a brick 25 times, but she isn't big or strong enough. Seems reasonable given the facts at hand, but here's where inductive reasoning can lead you astray. You might not have all the facts, such as Wendell is an accountant at a warehouse who exercises by getting out of bed in the morning. And before Mrs. Washington was a school teacher, she was on the wrestling team at San Diego State in the 105 to 116-pound weight class and would have won her division if that blonde girl from Cal Northridge hadn't stuck her thumb in her eye. Jaquan, I know your mother, and if I tell her about your behavior, she will beat you till your name is Jesus.
Mrs. Washington is a firecracker.
She is, and that's the only time she shows up in that whole book.
Well, she made her mark.
She did. IQ is the first in a series. Ide has written 6 of these books now. Goodreads says they're all around 4 stars. I really enjoyed the first one and look forward to the rest. This is IQ by Joe Ide.
Now, book 3.
My next recommendation is Odds Against by Dick Francis.
Oh, you love Dick Francis.
I do. Dick Francis was a British mystery author. He died in 2010 at the age of 89. And he is one of the all-time greats. He wrote 44 thrillers, mostly set in the world of horse racing. And honestly, I am surprised he's not as beloved as Agatha Christie.
Wow.
The New York Times said, just about the nicest thing you can do for a person who loves mysteries is turn them on to the works of Dick Francis.
Jeez.
So this is me turning you all on to the works of Dick Francis.
You talked about his book on our train episodes, and it's still on my TBR.
I did. I recommended the book The Edge, which is one of my all-time favorites. Much of that story takes place aboard a train barreling through the Canadian Rockies. And the sleuth in that one is an undercover agent for the British Jockey Club named Tor Kelsey. The narrators in Dick Francis novels are almost always amateur sleuths who are solving mysteries against their will. But in this one, Odds Against, he introduces Sid Hawley, a hero for the ages who works for a private detective agency.
Okay.
So let me tell you about Sid.
All right.
Instead of bone and cartilage, Sid's spine is made of integrity and fortitude. Life has knocked him around plenty. His dad died just a few weeks before he was born, and his mom passed when Sid was only 15 years old. But he soldiered on. He was apprenticed to a horse trainer, and he eventually became a successful steeplechase jockey. And then he was robbed of that life by a tragic accident that took his left hand. Despite all of that, or I don't know, maybe because of it, Sid is generally good-natured and well-intentioned. Like the worst has already happened to him. But when we meet him at the beginning of this book, he's vaguely depressed. He's been working at a detective agency. It's called Hunt Radnor Associates. And he kind of drifts through his days like a ghost. He's still grappling with the loss of his hand. He's recently divorced. Pretty much everything he cares about has been taken from him. And it doesn't help that he feels useless around the office. Radnor's is a bustling full-service agency. They have a missing persons department, a section devoted to divorce investigations, guard services, and their big moneymaker, the racing section. For a fee, horse trainers can check on the character of a prospective buyer. Bookies can check out their clients. Jockey clubs can investigate new members. The phrase okayed by Radnor is like racing code for trustworthy. But Sid's boss has never given him anything juicy to do. He's never walked on a race course security patrol or kept an eye out for pickpockets or done a stakeout to protect a champion horse. He mostly just hangs around the office reading other people's reports, which is doing nothing for his self-esteem.
Right.
When he's eventually assigned to a case, things go terribly wrong and he takes a bullet to the gut.
Jeez.
And while he's lying in the hospital bed, he starts feeling pretty sorry for himself. He says, "Time passed slowly. The police didn't find the shooter. My ex-wife didn't come. Radnor's typist sent me a get well card, and the hospital sent the bill."
That's pretty bleak.
I know. Dick Francis has taken our hero and thrown him down into the bottom of a dark hole.
Yeah.
Sid's father-in-law is named Charles, and Sid adores him, and Charles adores him back. They are besties. Charles comes to visit Sid in the hospital, and he invites him to convalesce at his super fancy manor house, which sounds nice.
Yeah.
But Charles has ulterior motives. He lures Sid back into the world of the living by tricking him into investigating a new case. Soon, Sid is using his newfound detective skills to put himself in harm's way while he ferrets out the bad guys. And as usual with Dick Francis, the bad guys are very, very bad. I don't want to say too much about what the case involves, but there are some fancy, expensive rocks. There's stuff going on at a race course. There's duplicitousness. There's danger. Everything you want in a mystery thriller. So I'm going to talk about Dick Francis some more.
Okay.
He is a master of efficient, tidy prose. His writing is like a British take on Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett. It's very spare and descriptive, but it's warmer, and his characters are more affable. It's got a real English countryside vibe instead of the harsh LA vibe. He's also really good at specificity. He's known for the research he does into the subculture that he's writing about. So at Sid's side, we learned the best way to search a room and describe a suspect, pick a lock, and misdirect someone's attention.
So it's an education.
I feel like you could use parts of this as a handbook. Sure, I'm pretty sure I know how to pick a lock now.
Awesome.
This is a high-stakes mystery, but it's also a pretty moving character study. Sid is grappling with heavy stuff. He's in deep mourning about his disability and the failure of his marriage. At one point, he admits, "I wanted nothing. I'd had what I wanted most in the world and lost it irrevocably. I stared at the ceiling, waiting for time to pass."
Yikes.
Yes. But if you're worried about Sid, rest assured, Dick Francis's heroes always triumph.
Oh, that's nice.
Dick Francis wrote 3 more books about Sid. Unlike some other literary detectives who never age, Sid matures throughout the books. So we see him evolve in his detective career and come to terms with his injury. And over the course of the books, it's like keeping up with an old friend. After he died, Dick Francis's son, Felix, wrote 2 more Sid Halle books that bring him right up to the present.
He inherited his father's characters.
I love that he's kept the tradition of his family going. Pretty well known that Dick Francis's wife was very involved in the research and creation of the books, and I just love thinking about that as their family business. When I was putting my notes together for this show, I was shocked to learn that Odds Against was first published in 1965.
Oh.
I had no idea it was older than I am. And it's remarkable that it doesn't feel dated. And obviously, there are no computers or cell phones. All of the detective work is done on the phone and in person. But aside from that, it holds up. There's no casual, uncomfortable racism, sexism, ableism that you might expect from a 60s novel. Sid is very empathetic and open-minded, and I think that is Dick Francis's heart shining through.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it?
If you want to see the inner workings of a detective agency in the company of a wounded, flawed, but completely lovable hero, this book is an excellent place to start. It's Odds Against by Dick Francis.
And now book 4.
So when we picked this destination, I knew I wanted to read a nonfiction book about how to become a private investigator. I was looking for something to give me an overview of what it's like. Like, what's the day-to-day? How do you get hired? If I wanted to be a private investigator, what could I expect? And it took me a bit to find a good one. I think I read a good chunk of about a half dozen books, and there was only one book I recommend if you're curious. But first, I wanted to tell you about a couple of books that didn't quite make the cut and why. So I should warn you that most of these titles are old, some of them like 20 years or so, and these were the latest I could find. Apparently the private investigation how-to market is slim.
Well, and I found a YouTube channel. I found several YouTube channels of detectives, so maybe they've moved from writing books to making videos.
Yeah, like much of the world, yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of these books I looked at have a very, so you think you're in a bad relationship vibe. The Private Investigator Handbook by Chuck Chambers, PI.
It's a very good gumshoe name.
Yeah, it is. That starts with Chapter 1 title, quote, How to Catch the Cheating Bastard.
Stop it. No, it doesn't.
It does. That chapter includes a cheating checklist.
Oh, fun.
Yep. It suggests you should be suspicious if your spouse has a new interest in exercise, arrives home after work smelling of a fresh shower, or suddenly bought a pager.
So tawdry. So 90s.
Yeah, I'd be very suspicious if you came home with a pager. I looked at one book that's a college text, The Process of Investigation Concepts and Strategies for Investigators in the Private Sector, 4th edition.
Oh, way to suck the life out of a fun career.
By Senewald and Tsukayama. It's a good book, but it's pretty academic. It's got information on the entire investigation industry. So there's a chapter on how to set up a room for interrogations, and another on how to gather evidence from a computer, so how to capture the files so they're legally admissible. There's advice about managing detectives and org charts for small and medium-sized security organizations.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I thought all of it was pretty interesting. And you know, should you need to set up a security department, this is your first stop. But it was also not something that I felt like I could recommend as an introduction to the field. And I was surprised to find out that the book that did what I wanted, the book that gave me the most complete picture of what it's like to be a working PI, is The Complete Idiot's Guide to Private Investigating by Stephen Cary Brown.
Right on.
Yeah. Stephen Cary Brown was a private investigator for 20 years and an FBI agent for over a decade.
Wow.
Yeah, he's got some things to say. And The Idiot's Guide covers a lot of good ground. The first section is about how to start a career. So how do you get some experience, get a license? What kind of equipment do you want? The next section starts with the good stuff, how to dig for information. So Brown writes about how to find somebody and the surprising utility of courthouse records. He says you can make a living just knowing your local courthouse record system. Brown writes about which sites he uses for online searches and how to break a number, which is detective speak for how to find the person attached to a phone number.
Oh, neat.
Yeah. And as he goes along, he dispels some ideas we've gotten from Hollywood. So he writes about the myth of the untraceable prepaid cell phone, for instance. And then section 3 is about techniques, how to canvass a neighborhood and the value of that, and how to run surveillance either on foot or from a car or alone or in a team. And the last 2 sections are about topics that relate to specific situations. So how to bring home a runaway teenager.
Aw.
Yeah. How to manage electronic surveillance. What does a criminal defense case look like from the perspective of a private detective? And how do you talk to a judge? That kind of thing. There are all sorts of interesting bits in this book. There are Brown stories and some of his techniques. So, for instance, he walks you through how he would trick a hotel into giving him a receipt, somebody else's receipt that he needed for evidence.
Whenever I see stuff like that in movies and TV, I wonder if it would actually work. But I don't think that I have the chutzpah to try it.
Yeah.
So how does he do it?
So let's say a wife contacts you and says she's sure her husband was in a Sheraton 2 weeks ago on August 7th or whatever. His name is Gary Fielding, the husband's name. And she wants you to get proof that he was there. So you call the hotel and you make a reservation for the next day. And you tell them there's going to be 2 of you and Gary Fielding. The next day you check in. And when you're checking in, you tell the front desk that Fielding hasn't arrived yet. And can you tell him what room you're in when he comes in? And then an hour or so later, you ring down to accounting and you identify yourself as Gary Fielding. You're in room whatever you're in. You've stayed here last month, but you lost your copy of the statement. You need to file an expense report. Can you drop another copy by the room?
I mean, that 100% seems like it would work.
It has totally worked.
Yeah.
For this guy. Yeah.
Sure.
And they deliver the copy, and now you have proof that Gary Fielding stayed there.
It's not even that sneaky.
No.
It doesn't even require you to be that audacious. You just make a boring phone call for accounting.
Yeah. There's another bit that sounds like it'd be a great setup for a detective series that was in the chapter on getting a PI license. So in some states, you can work toward a license if you have a licensed detective managing your agency. So his advice was, start an agency, hire a cranky but lovable detective as a manager, and work toward your license. He didn't say the cranky and lovable part, but we're all thinking
it's implied.
That. Yeah. So I'm thinking Tommy Lee Jones or Gary Oldman or Maggie Smith finding their way to redemption while the younger, naive, wannabe detective figures out who murdered her parents or whatever. I mean, do I have to write the rest of this? It feels like it's all there. If you're curious about the day-to-day of a private investigator, or if you're the protagonist in my new dramedy series starring Gary Oldman and Elle Fanning, you will enjoy this. It's The Complete Idiot's Guide to Private Investigating by Stephen Carey Brown. That is definitely the title of the series, too. The Complete Idiot's Guide to Private Investigating.
Would 100% watch every episode of that.
Here's book 5.
My final recommendation is The Manual of Detection by Jedediah Barry.
Oh, you love this one.
I really do. I read it when it came out in 2009. I read it somewhere in between now and then, and I reread it for this show, and it was wonderful each time. This is a delightful mashup of noir crime and darkly whimsical fantasy. It's like if Wes Anderson and Tim Burton joined forces to write a pastiche of a Sam Spade novel.
Sign me up.
The story includes, but is not limited to, a reluctant detective, a mysterious agency, an unnamed metropolis pelted with rain, a sinister circus, twins with more brawn and anger than good sense, and much, much more. There are 2 main characters, the very bureaucratic detective agency, and Charles Unwin, our unwitting hero. The agency is so vivid in my imagination. It's all shades of gray the way I picture it.
Physically. Okay.
It's housed in a sprawling building that in my mind is a hulking edifice that took the idea of architectural brutalism and just ran with it.
So Kafka-esque.
Yes.
All right.
Inside, there are clerks, detectives, and watchers, all located on separate floors, and they meet only under the direst of circumstances. There is no mixing and mingling between the detectives, the clerks, and the watchers.
Hmm.
Our man Charles has worked as a clerk to Detective Travis T. Sievert for 20 years. He dutifully makes sense of the detective's reports and files them away for posterity. Sievert is a superstar detective, known for solving cases like The Oldest Murdered Man and The Man Who Stole November 12th. He's also run afoul of the henchman behind Caligari's Traveling Carnival. But back to Charles.
Okay.
He's an unassuming fellow. He's happy to be a clerk in the banal safety of the 14th floor, among rows of identical desks, each topped with a telephone, a typewriter, a green shaded lamp, and a letter tray. He rides his bicycle to work every day, and he's figured out how to rig an umbrella to the handlebars to protect him from the ceaseless rain.
It's pretty bleak.
When you read it, it's bleak but cute.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting that.
On the day the story opens, Charles is running late. He's burnt his oatmeal, tied the wrong tie, and almost forgot his wristwatch. Now, as he arrives at the central terminal to look for a mysterious woman in a plaid coat, he realizes his socks are also wet. He's squelching around. These indignities are only the beginning of what's about to happen to Charles. At the station, he has an unexpected encounter with a detective who says, "Forget the 14th floor. Report to room 2919. You've been promoted." Then he pulls a slim green hardcover book with gold lettering from his pocket, hands it to Charles, and says, "Standard issue. It saved my life more than once." The title of the book is The Manual of Detection. When Charles tries to ask questions, the detective waves him off and warns, "If you ever see me again, you don't know me. Got it?" Then he disappears into the crowd.
That's very promising.
It really is. I love that most of the characters talk like they know they're in a detective story. There's a level of self-consciousness in there that I really enjoyed. When Charles reports to the agency, he learns that his detective, Sievert, is missing. And when he goes to talk to the watcher, his boss, Charles finds out that the watcher is dead in his office.
What?
Does all of this have something to do with Sievert's old cases? Or with the femme fatale known as Cleopatra Greenwood? Or Caligari's Traveling Carnival? Despite his desire to remain unnoticed, it is now up to Charles to find out.
I feel like that's all you need to say about that.
But there's more.
Okay.
On his mission to solve multiple crimes, Charles is joined by a plucky assistant who may or may not be trustworthy. And his efforts are guided by the Manual of Detection. Each chapter of this book opens with an excerpt from the manual. They're really fun, and they kind of foreshadow the challenges that Charles is about to face in the next phase of his investigation. For example, there's this bit on corpses. Many cases begin with one. This can be disconcerting, but at least you know where you stand. Worse is the corpse that appears partway into your investigation, complicating everything. Best to proceed, therefore, with the vigilance of one who assumes a corpse is always around the next corner. That way, it is less likely to be your own.
Good advice.
Good advice. Swaths of this novel are a solid detective procedural with Charles interrogating suspects, following clues, and getting into and out of difficult situations. Other bits of it are purely fantastical. There's a poker game at a bar called 40 Winks, where people play for the right to ask questions instead of money.
That's great.
There's a horde of sleepwalkers, each carrying a sack of alarm clocks. At one point, Charles is tailed by someone with a portable typewriter that somehow types out what Charles is just about to say before he says it. It's all kind of bananas, but it also makes sense when you're immersed in this world.
Yeah.
The last 30% of this book is amazing. I can't say why, or it will ruin your fun. But suffice it to say that it is a brilliant blend of the noir and fantasy elements. And it's also a joy to watch Charles kind of bumble his way into being a pretty good detective. That's The Manual of Detection by Jedediah Barry.
Those are 5 books we love set in detective agencies. Visit our show notes at strongsenseofplace.com for links and details. We have photographic evidence for some of the stories we've told you today. Proof that Eugene Francois Vidocq was a badass. Proof that you can still make a career move into private investigation.
I found a detective agency name generator and a YouTube channel run by a married couple in their 60s that are PIs in South Florida.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, that's your dream channel. And a free online course that will teach you how to be a detective.
I love all of that.
I'll be sharing all of this stuff in show notes and in Substack and in Patreon over the next 2 weeks. So if you're not a Patreon supporter, now would be a great time to join us.
Mel, where are we headed for our next episode?
We're turning our curiosity to Saudi Arabia.
Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon.
Have you ever heard about the 19th century French actress with so many lovers that they formed a lovers' union? Or what about the Aboriginal Australian bandit who faked going into labor just to escape the police, which she did escape from them. It was a great plan. How about the French queen who murdered her rival with poison gloves? I'm Ann Foster, host of the feminist women's history comedy podcast, Vulgar History. Every week I share the saga of a woman from history whose story you probably didn't already know, and you will never forget after you hear it. Sometimes we re-examine well-known people like Cleopatra or Pocahontas, sharing the truth behind their legends. Sometimes we look at the scandalous women you'll never find in a history textbook. Listen to Vulgar History wherever you get podcasts. And if you're curious, the people I was talking about before, the Australian woman is named Marianne Bugg, and the French actress was named Rochelle, no last name, just Rochelle. And the queen who poisoned her rival is Catherine de' Medici. I have episodes about all of them.